Shalom to you, and this is Pastor Paul Atino Mayo here, and I hope that you're doing well and that the Lord has kept you safe. Today is a very special day back in my country, Kenya, because it's the national election day. And so much has happened in the last 1 year or in the few years that so many people have been campaigning, and they want to be presidents, they want to be governors, they want to be members of parliament, and to all levels of leadership in my country. Of course, I've been following very keenly, especially among the Christians, how the conversation has been going on, a lot of debates online and among my friends, especially who are Christians, on who is the right person to vote for. There are those candidates, especially presidential candidates, and I know this goes across all the levels of leadership in Kenya, who have presented themselves as the Christian candidates. I heard one of them say, oh, now for the first time in the election of Kenya, we have a candidate for the church. And the church in Kenya, especially these elections, has been really very bold and very active, taken sides. Some of them have said, we know who God has said is going to be president. Some have said, we have a candidate and this is the candidate, and openly campaigned for some candidates to be president or to be leaders. And as we come to the election day today, of course, God willing, by tomorrow or by later tonight, the results will be out, and the direction will be clear on who becomes the president. My concern is especially to us Christians. What becomes of us? What becomes of the church after the election today? Whoever becomes the president, what happens to the preachers and the pastors and the bishops who have been pushing one side of the political divide? I just want to submit a few thoughts this morning, and I know most Kenyans are right now voting, that whoever becomes the president, whether it was the candidate of the church or the other one, I want to submit to us that God is still in control and God will still reign. You know, one of the characters of God is that he is omniscient. He knows everything before the beginning and before the end. He knows everything. And of course, he knows who will become the 5th president of Kenya. But of course, it's important to differentiate that God's knowledge is not necessarily his will. God can know and he knows who's become the president, but that does not necessarily tell us that that is his will. But Kenya is not a theocracy. Kenya is not a nation that is ruled 100% by God. God has control, but God allows us Kenyans to express our will by voting. And whoever we vote for may not be necessarily God's will, but God knows, and God can allow whoever we vote to be president. So for those who pride after the election and think that the one who won is your candidate, don't necessarily, and I want you to mark my words, necessarily equivalent it to God's will. We see in the Old Testament, you know, when Samuel was disturbed and he went to pray to God because the Israelites wanted a king. And he told God, you know, they have rejected you as king, and I think what they are doing is wrong. You know, God gave a very amazing counsel to Samuel. He told him, it's not you that they have rejected. It is me, God, that they have rejected. And whoever they want, if they want a king, just give to them. I want to draw that parallel. Of course, I know that the Israel cannot be compared to Kenya. Israel at that time of Samuel was a theocracy. It was a nation ruled by God. It was not a democracy. And God was the ruler the sovereign ruler was the king of Israel, and Israelites were rejecting him. So that's a different story from the story of Kenya, because Kenya is a democracy. It is the people who decide, and the people can choose to vote and decide for God's way, or they can choose to decide on the other way. God has given us a free will. And one of the expression how we use the free will is actually in our elections. So I would like to share this first thought. Whoever becomes the president, don't go fighting or don't go being disappointed that God's will has been done or God's will has not been done. Remember, God is sovereign. He cannot be controlled. He can even allow our own choices, which are not necessarily his will, to prevail. Or he is bigger than our choices. We may want something, but remember, God is more concerned about Kenya than even Kenyans themselves. Because sometimes we go to elections and we think it's all about economy, it's all about democracy, it's all about justice and all the needs that we have. But remember that the sovereign ruler in the world is God. And the King of Kings is God himself. So God has also an interest in Kenya. So sometimes God can overrule our own will and put a leader for his own purposes. So what I'm trying to say is that we cannot box God. God's will is not so simple as many people think, that you just go and pray and put some oil on somebody and you say, God has spoken. God's will is very complex, and it's good to be sober about it. The other thought that I want to share as we go into the elections today is that God in his providence can even use a bad ruler as his servant. We have seen God using people who fear him, like David and many other kings in other nations. I don't want to mention names. But also we have seen God use people who don't even know him. People who are bad leaders in that sense. We have seen God use dictators as his servants. And actually, if you read the book of Romans chapter 13, especially verse 4, it says that whoever is in leadership is a servant of God, and God can use him. God has used, unbelieving kings to even save Israel. All of us remember, King Darius, who God used to rebuild the temple and to allow the Israelites to get back from slavery. So I want to stop this confidence that whoever wins, whoever God allows to be president in Kenya from tomorrow, God can use them, whether they are good or bad. God has the ability to use them as his servant for the good of the nation. Because sometimes we have this hope that, if we elect a Christian candidate, a Christian president, then things will go well. I think simple history, if you look around Africa, for example, who are our immediate neighbors, we have had even pastors as presidents or Christians as presidents. And sometimes if you compare what good they have done to the nation, we see sometimes others who are not even Christians have even done more good to the nation. So what I'm trying to say is that God is not limited to human beings, whether they are believers or not. God can use anybody for the good of the nation. So let us have that peace. We have a president who is bigger than the one who is our candidate, and God is in control. The next thing I wanted to share is, never forget that God is causing all things, including this election, to work together for the good of his people, conforming them more fully to the image of Jesus Christ, his son. We read that from Romans chapter 8, verse 28. In all things, God works for the good of those who love them. Whatever the outcome of this election may be, one thing is sure: God will use this election for our sanctification. We don't know God's plan, especially for the church. We are so much concerned about peace and prosperity and economy, But I want to submit to us, God is more concerned about our holiness and our sanctification as a church. Because now I'm speaking to the believers. God is more concerned about his glory. God is more concerned about holiness, not about who is the president. He's more concerned about his own glory. And if he uses a Christian to magnify his glory, he can choose to allow one. And if he knows the one you think is not so much of a Christian is the one who will even give more glory to God, he will allow him to be president. So be prepared. God is not bound to what we think. Because sometimes we think, oh, if we elect someone from the church, then it will be better for the church. Let me tell you, they may even cause more harm to God's work than even those we think are not so much Christian. You know, I was telling one of my friends in one of these debates, I was saying that, you know, when you're a Christian and you're projecting yourself as a presidential candidate or as a governor candidate or as a leader, and you are associated with the church, and your integrity is not to that level of what is expected of someone who proclaims to be a Christian, actually it does more harm to the Christian community, because we are supposed to be light and salt outside there. But if we are the ones carrying all these baggages, but we are the ones, on one hand, we are carrying the Bible, on the other hand, we are carrying baggages, we cause more harm to the character of God. So let us not be bound to these things. Whoever God allows to be president, remember, God will work all things for the sanctification of the church. The church has flourished, sometimes even under persecution. The church has been more focused on God, even under rulers who are not godly. Because then, you know, under persecution, then you focus more on God. But when you're so relaxed, you know, whoever is on top offices is a Christian, the church sometimes relaxes. So God is not bound to our needs. God is bigger, and his will is bigger than our needs. And then lastly, as Christians, our greatest allegiance should be to God. The scripture tells us in Acts chapter 5, verse 29, that we must obey God rather than man. I know we have our political inclinations because of our history, because of the injustice we have suffered, and because of our sinfulness. Some of us are just supporting some political leaders because of our tribe. Just tell it. Or because we hate one person or we hate another tribe. So that's nothing really necessary. It's not necessarily something to do with what God has spoken to you. It's because of the inclination of your heart. And remember, our hearts can be desperately wicked. But I want you to remember that our allegiance is not to our man because he comes from our tribe. Our allegiance must rather be to God. Our greatest allegiance must be to God. So whoever becomes president in Kenya, remember that if it's the person that your heart was inclining to, that should not be where your hope is and your allegiance. If it's the person that you are not inclined to, don't go on disappointed and thinking God has failed you. Remember, our allegiance is to God. So whoever becomes the president, when they are favorable or not, remember that God is greater, God is sovereign, God is bigger than them, and our obedience should be to God. Because even those who claim God can come in and even tell us to do things that are not godly, can bring money to the church that is not godly, can take to the nation to things that are not godly. Those who are not godly can equally do the same. They can lead us to lifestyles in the nation and allow laws which are ungodly. Some of the presidential candidates, I'm afraid, they are surrounded by advisors whose principles are not godly. And it's a worrying trend when you look at it. But whichever the case, remember, our allegiance, even after the election, is not to our candidate. Our greatest allegiance is to God. Will we stand and obey what God says? I want to wish us well, and I want to pray for peace in the elections and even the after elections in Kenya, and let us know that God is still in control. But as Christians, let us go out, cast your vote, express your will, but submit your will to the bigger will of God. God bless you, and God bless Kenya.